Thank you so much for your time. Tom Jeffries here on the HowStreet.com channel on YouTube. Our guest is the eminent Dr. Marc Faber. Dr. Faber is one of the world's leading economists. He is here in Vancouver as one of the lead speakers at the Agora Wealth Symposium, the 10th annual. It's called A Decade of Reckoning. It's good to have you back in town, Dr. Faber.
My pleasure.
Good to see you here.
Thank you.
The speech was terrific, as per
Thank
usual.
you.
Let's get to a couple of recent quotes. You said in the last 100 years, the United States dollar has lost 95% of its value.
Yes,
What's
correct.
the punchline that comes after that?
Well, basically, I mean, you know, there's this whole debate about inflation and deflation, and the media, and under the influence, obviously, of some Harvard professors and the Federal Reserve, they paint deflation as bad and inflation as good and so forth. When in fact, the whole 19th century, the US began the 19th century with 4 million people. They ended in 1900 at 80 million population. And we had the entire industrialization. Growth in real terms between 1800 and 1900 was much higher than it's been in the last 100 years, and certainly much higher than in the last 70 years.
Right.
And yet that period of time, 1800 and 1900, was amidst falling prices. And the reason it didn't harm is that wages were flat, but the price level went down, so affordability improved and real wages went up strongly. That's very different what we had now in the last 20 years, when real wages for the typical person in the United States, the median household, has been going down because the cost of living increases were higher than the wage increases. Not for the Goldman Sachs partners, but that's a different story.
True. Very true. You said something that really awakened the audience up today. You said in some ways 73, 74, a very bumpy time, was actually in some ways a little better than what's actually today is a little better than what happened in 73, 74.
Well, I mean, all I can say is I travel a lot. I was in Singapore a couple of days ago. I'm here today in Vancouver. I mean, I don't see any recession obviously by eyesight.
Right.
You understand? Their shops are still running relatively well, and there's still a lot of traffic. I mean, when you drive from the airport to the city centers anywhere in the world, you don't notice a recession.
Really?
So it's a recession at a relatively high level of economic activity, but lower than it was, say, 2 years ago. So people say it's horrible. Yeah, it's lower than 2 years ago, but this is nothing yet very, very serious. There has been a very serious wealth destruction, that undoubtedly. But I mean, people still obtain their wages, and they have unemployment benefits, they have pensions and so forth. It's not yet soup lines and so forth, whereby in the US there's 33 million people that have food stamps, that receive food stamps. So, you know, we have a recession that has been going on for a number of years for the average American, for the median household, because his wages didn't go up and because unemployment was relatively high. And the unemployment today, or let's put it this way, the employment today in the US is no higher than 10 years ago. In other words, we had an expansion in employment 2001 to 2007, and we've given back everything that we gained during that period of time, and this is the worst employment picture since the Great Depression.
Mm-hmm. Look at the GDP to debt ratios now are getting rather startling, are they not?
Yeah, they're horrible. I mean, the fact is simply this, and I have to return in this respect to the deflation debate and inflation debate. The deflation is maintained that we will have deflation and that bonds, government bonds, will rally. But my view is this: if the stimulus package that we have now in place and the quantitative easing that has been implemented doesn't work, more stimulus to come, more quantitative easing. If that doesn't work, and it's unlikely to work in the long run, more of the same. So in my view, the deficit today in the US this year is going to be in the order of $2 trillion. I don't think that next year will be lower. I think it will be higher. And the following year also. And then around 2018, 2019, the liabilities arising from Medicare and Medicaid kicks in, and that will again enlarge government debt dramatically. So the deflation is even if there is a bout of deflation, doesn't mean that bonds will rally, because the quality of credit of the US government is going down. It's like Californian bonds. They are now junk bonds.
Well, what happens to us if we go to the bank and I get a GIC for 0.25%, Dr. Faber? So am I not forced as an investor to go out and speculate? We're going around in circles, aren't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the objection I have to the policy response that we have had over the last 6 to 9 months is it's exactly the same that brought about the problems after 2001. After 2001, they slashed the Fed fund rate in the US down to 1%, left it at 1% until 2004, and then in baby steps increased interest rates. I don't believe that the Federal Reserve in the US will ever again implement tight monetary conditions. Really? Never again. So what we'll have in the long run is inflation.
Is this not like sort of like the Greenspan put? In other words, it's a Bernanke put. People at Wall Street know he's going to keep it easy, so they know what side of the fence to be on?
Well, I mean, you know, they listen and they think, well, one day the Fed will withdraw liquidity. I don't believe in that, because if you also look at some of the writings, say Mr. Krugman, he argues that the best for the world would now be to have another bubble. But if you look what brought us into all these problems, it's the bubble in the first place. That we had a bubble economy post 2001 when all asset classes went up except for the dollar. 2008 everything went down, but the dollar was strong. Now since March the stock market is up, but the dollar is down. It's very interesting. I think the policy response is a total catastrophe. And I also feel the purpose of any crisis is to clean the system. But nothing has been cleaned. It's gotten worse and worse and worse. There's this entanglement between Wall Street and the politicians, and I mean corrupt politicians, and the Treasury and the Federal Reserve, open doors between the three, and Goldman Sachs and all these investment banks. I think this is not the final crisis. The final crisis is the one where the whole system will collapse and the whole system will be cleaned of corrupt politicians and incompetent economic policymakers.
Corrupt politicians? I've never heard that phrase before.
Yes, correct. I also never heard it before.
One of my favorite lines of the speech today, Dr. Faber, and I was roaring, was all it seems the bad ideas migrate towards universities.
Yes, correct. That is sure. The worst ideas, they become kind of the mantra of academics at universities and so forth. Print money. The latest joke is the writings of Professor Gregory Mankiw of Harvard. His proposal is to make people spend money, and to speculate, you penalize savings. In other words, if you deposit with the bank 100 today, then you only get back 94 in a year's time. And then he goes on to explain that this could be also done through inflation, that essentially if you have 6% inflation and interest rates are at 0, you also penalize by 6% annually. So you force people again to speculate. That's the frame of mind of the Federal Reserve, which is, in my opinion, brain damaged.
It's always great to have you in town, and you're always thought-provoking. And a reminder, gloomdoomboom.com. It used to be free. It's now $200 US a year. The reason is partly the proceeds going to help ongoing help for underprivileged people in beautiful Thailand, home for Dr. Faber. Chiang Mai, the Rose of the North. Dr. Faber, good to see you. And
yes,
thank you.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Dr. Marc Faber. Tom Jeffries here on HowStreet.com and our YouTube channel. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll see you again soon.
Comments made on How Street Video and HowStreet.com are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at HowStreet.com. How Street Video is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.